Hello and welcome to this lab demonstration on modifying virtual machines. After completing this lab video, you will be able to change settings of a virtual machine. The most common reason for modifying a virtual machine is increased demand for memory or disk space. If the virtual machine and its operating system support such changes while they are running, you do not even have to power down the virtual machine. If, however, you are not sure whether or not your virtual machine guest operating system supports the memory hot plug function, then I would suggest that you play safe and shut down your virtual machine, change the memory size, and then power the virtual machine up again. The same applies to changes of the disk size. It's always better to have a short interruption and do changes while the virtual machine is powered off, rather than changing things on a running system and corrupting the virtual machine. Changing settings of virtual machines is a common task, so you want to be familiar with the related procedures. For this lab, you should know the vSphere client user interface, and you should be familiar with configuring virtual machine settings. In the first task of this lab exercise, we will add RAM to a virtual machine. Our VM supports the memory hot plug function, so we will do the change while the virtual machine is up and running. Then we will increase the size of the disk of the same virtual machine, and we will connect to the web console, and within the guest operating system, Windows 10, we will extend the C drive to use the added space. In the last task, we will rename a virtual machine and check how this affects the name of the folders and files on the data store. I'm sure I provided you enough good reasons to watch the following video on modifying virtual machines. Now, let's get started. We want to perform the configuration on vCenter Server SA VCSA01. So the first step is to connect to this server. Then we log in as administrator at vSphere.local. First, we want to increase memory of a virtual machine. We will power on the VM Win1006, then note its currently configured total memory, and then we will increase the memory size while the virtual machine is running. So in the navigator pane, under VMs and templates, we open the ICM data center. We expand the lab VMs folder. And in here we find a VM called Win1006. I right-click the VM, select Power and Power On. When we look at the VM hardware pane, we can see that the memory is 4 GB. Now let's edit the hardware settings. So we right-click the virtual machine and we select Edit Settings. And now we want to change the size to 4500 megabyte. We click OK. And you can see that the memory was changed instantly. Why does it show 439 GB? Well, because I used 4500 megabyte, but 1024 megabyte are 1 GB. So 4500 megabyte, you have to divide them by 1024 to get to the gigabyte. And if you do the math, you will realize that this is exactly the 439 GB that we see here. We were able to change memory of this virtual machine while it is running, because the virtual machine supports the memory hot plug function. If this wouldn't be the case, we had to power down the virtual machine, change the settings, and then power it back on. In the next task, we want to increase the size of the virtual machine disk file of this virtual machine. And once we did that, we also want to make use of that additional space. Think about hard disks and partitions. When a disk is bigger, it doesn't mean that the operating system immediately uses that added space, Actually, if we rescan the device in the operating system, it will just show the additional space, but unpartitioned. So we have to use guest operating system tools to resize the partition, to extend the space. And that's what we are going to do in this next task. So first we have to change the size of the disk. We right-click the virtual machine. We select Edit Settings. And when we look at the hard disk, we see that it has a size of 25 gigabyte at the moment. Can expand it to see more details, but basically the important part for us now is the size, and that is 25 gigabyte. Now we want to increase this, so I simply change 25 to 27 and I click OK. And you can see here that the hard disk size was modified. We added 2 gigabyte to that virtual machine. Now let's open a web console. And inside the operating system, we want to check now whether we have these additional 2 gigabyte, and then we want to make use of it by extending the current volume. To do that, we have to start the Windows Disk Management. And when we look at disk 0, we see that the total size is 26.98, so this is our now 27 gigabyte disk. And we can see that there is an unallocated space at the end. These are the 2 gigabyte that we added. It may happen that you do not see that space immediately. If that happens to you, then you would have to click Action and rescan disks. In our case, Windows already detected the change, and what we want to do now is make use of this additional space. So we right-click the C drive and we select Extend Volume. And in the wizard, we first click Next. Now we have to select the disk that we want to extend. In this case, there is only a single disk, so it is already selected. But if you had multiple disks, then you would see them under the available list and you could add them to the right-hand side to the selected disk. So you can add or remove as you wish. It shows you the total size of the volume, which is 27 gigabyte. It shows you the available space, which is 2 gigabyte. And now you have to select the amount of space that you want to use to extend the volume. In our case, we want to use all of it, so we keep the default and we click Next. Now we click Finish and we see that drive C now has a size of 26.4 gigabyte. 500 gigabyte are used for this partition, and then there are almost 100 megabyte for another partition. So in total, that brings us to our 27 gigabyte or a little bit less. So first we added the size to the VMDK file under Hardware Settings. After that, the guest operating system sees that additional unpartitioned space. But to be able to use it from the file system perspective, we have to change this partition, this volume, to use that available space or that additional space, and that's what we do by extending the volume here inside Windows 10 using Disk Management. We can close the web console, and now in the last task of this lab exercise, we want to rename a virtual machine. And then we want to examine if and how this would affect the names of the files and folders of that virtual machine on the data store. So we're again using the same VM. I right-click our Win10.06 virtual machine. I select Rename, and now we change the name. Let's call it Win10 New. We click OK, and the change is immediately done. In the navigation pane, we see that the name changed. Now we want to have a look at the data store that this VM resides on. So I click Data Store in the right pane while our VM is selected in the navigator pane. And we see the ICM Data Store. So let's right-click the ICM Data Store and select Browse Files. We see directories here, and you see that the name of the directory wasn't changed at all. So it's still the same, Win10.06. And if we have a look into the directory, then we see that the file names also didn't change. It's still Win10.06 for the VMX file, for the VMX log file, for the VMDK file, for all the files. So when you create a virtual machine, the name that you give to that virtual machine is by default the name of the folder and of all the files in it. When you rename a virtual machine, you're just changing the name here in vCenter, but on the actual data store, in the file system, the folder name and the name of the files remains the same. Now let's change the name back to what it was. So we right-click the virtual machine again and we rename it to Win10.06. And again, you see it's instantly updated here. Okay, so we don't need that virtual machine running anymore. Let me shut down the VM. And this wraps up this lab. We changed the hardware configuration, we changed memory and disk sizes. We were able to do that on a running virtual machine simply because it supports such hot plug changes. And we had a look at the disk files and verified that they do not change if you rename a virtual machine. Congratulations! You have completed the Modifying Virtual Machines lab demonstration video. In this lab, we first adjusted memory size of a virtual machine. We were able to do that on the running live virtual machine. And after we changed memory, we then went on and enlarged the disk size. We went into the operating system to see that additional space on the disk as unpartitioned space, and then we extended an existing volume, our C drive, to use that extra space. Finally, we renamed the virtual machine, and we verified that renaming a virtual machine in vCenter does not have any effect to the files and folder names on the data store. You now know how to change a virtual machine, and you are aware that if supported, you can do these changes while the virtual machine is running. Thank you for watching this lab demonstration video. I hope the knowledge acquired here will help you with your daily job assignments, and good luck as you continue your journey in VMware World.